if you go to the website for the Reagan Memorial Library and kind of timestamp myself, Reagan was the first president I was old enough to vote for. And so that's kind of a timestamp moment for me. And if you go to the website for the Reagan Library and Museum, which is actually located in California, just outside of Los Angeles. But if you were to go to their website, they have an education portion where they have some things that teachers can use, some resources, discussion questions. If a teacher is working with her or his class, getting them thinking about the presidency of Ronald Reagan. So one of the discussion questions was interesting, and it brought me back to a memory that I had when I was visiting the museum. One of the discussion questions was, if you became president of the United States, what are 3 things you would have in your office? So I want you to think about that. If you became president tomorrow of the United States, what is something that you would have in your office? And you think about plaques or other things, that mementos, etc. Anybody want to share something they would have in their office? A Bible. Okay, that's a good choice. I think he actually had one on the shelf. Anything? Picture of family. Had several of those in his.
But definitely.
As a firearm? Okay. Yeah. I was trying to think. Yeah, we were just finished the Iranian hostage crisis, so that would have been handy back then. When I read that question, it made me think about when I went there a couple of years ago. Every year, the presidents of the Brotherhood schools, we get together for a conference to do research and share information with each other. A lot of us go to educational and academic conferences, but most of those are focused on other religious groups. So we get together, we can get some information that better fits what we're doing. And so one of those was in California a couple 3 years ago. And so my wife went with me, and we went over to the Reagan Library. That was kind of the one thing I wanted to do before I went back home. And I remember when I was there they've got a setup of his office, how it might have looked in the Oval Office there in the museum. If you ever get a chance to go, I think I've been to 3 presidential libraries. If I could, I would go to all of them. Doesn't matter whether I would have voted for them or not. You just learn a lot when you see what makes a person tick that ends up leading a nation. And so it was interesting to me, as I'm looking at it, what I'm focusing on is what is hanging on the wall, what are the knickknacks he has around? Because a lot of times in our offices, we have things that matter to us, things that guide us, things that are sentimental, or that remind us of things that are important. And so I noticed 2 plaques that were on his desk. Now, these are facsimiles. In another part of the museum, they had the actual plaque. And here are some pictures of him at the desk, and one in particular I want you to notice. I'll bring up, it's right here, it's over here. What's interesting, in these 2 pictures, the plaque is facing towards whoever is visiting him. In this one, as he's working through his papers, I don't know if y'all can tell or not, the plaque is turned towards him. And I found myself thinking, okay, did you turn it out depending on who was visiting you? Did you turn it in on days you needed to be reminded? Or is it neither of the above? It's whoever cleans your desk and what direction they put it down at. But here's what the 2 plaques said. One said, it can be done, but here's the one that really impacted me. It says, there is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. I was so impacted by that statement that I went to the gift shop, bought an exact replica, and it now sits on my desk. It is amazing what God can do in a life when a leader doesn't care who gets the credit. Maybe if you get nothing else out of the day, I would encourage you to hang on to that. Have any of you read the book about being a second chair leader? It is written by Dr. Abraham Manasseh. And in this book, it's called Leading from the Second Chair, How to Lead Without a Position. And could I get someone to read his definition and summary of what it means to be a second chair leader? When Isaac reached out to me, and first of all, thank you for being here, even though several of you have heard me before. That's when you find out truly your friends are. I'm grateful that you've been up all night and you came anyway. I've got a cousin and a cousin by marriage here, and even though they've heard me, they came anyway. That's true friendship. So I just appreciate all of y'all being here. And I was excited about the topic that Isaac gave me. I don't know about you. I do a lot of reading. I do also now, because I spend a lot of time on the road, I do a lot of listening to the Bible and listening to books. I got the audiobook membership where you pay so much a month, and then I always have credits because it saves me money. So I'm just listening to books all the time. So I've got a list of books I want to work through. And so I'm working through them. And then sometimes I'm looking for an excuse to go to one. So there was a book that someone had put on my radar, this book by Manasseh. And when I was given the topic of leading while following, that popped into my mind and said, great, I have an excuse. And so I pulled it up and started listening to it. And I would recommend that you read it. You won't agree with everything he says, but it's just a good general book on leadership. But he also dives in the idea of leading while following, being a second chair leader, being a leader and an influencer when you may not be at the top of the food chain. You may not be the top leader in that organization, yet you're leading and influencing people. You may or may not have a position. You may not be called the youth minister or an elder or a preacher. You can fill in whatever blank you want to there. And so I found it helpful. And he actually, as a part of the book, he looks at 4 biblical examples. So, for example, he talks about Timothy and Joseph. He talks about Aaron and John Mark and Elisha, I think, is the 5th one he looks at. And he talks several principles. So as I thought about leading while following, that became my springboard to just think about that idea of leading from the second chair. I would like to look at 2 folks he doesn't really dive into in the book. I want us to look at 2 kings and just talk about some things that we can learn as we think about those 2 kings, and we think about this idea of leading while following. So I mentioned to you that I do a lot of listening as I'm riding around, and most days I listen to my Bible, especially going back and forth to work or on trips. Sometimes I'm listening to whatever I'm going to be speaking on. David, Shannon, and I are good friends going back to when we were 15 and 16 years old, and we've talked about the challenge in our jobs now of we speak several places, getting the study time is rough. And so, I don't know if you've ever watched David, sometimes he's going to have his PowerPoint in his hand. It's just different from when he was in local ministry and you're trying to put that together. When he was in local ministry, there's nothing in his hand. But we've both had to learn how do we prepare lessons on the road. And that can be a challenge. So one of the great things about ministry now is technology helps us to do that. You can listen, study, you can even take notes and dictate and do all kinds of things while you're driving down the road in your car. And I do a lot of listening to the Bible. So if I've got a lesson coming up from Acts, I'm listening through Acts or whatever that may be. But then I also have my daily listening through. So usually I start in Matthew, go through the New Testament, and then I back up and come back to the Old Testament. So I am in, as of this morning, 1 Kings chapter 7 in my coming through the Old Testament. So I just finished. It so happened as I was thinking about this lesson, I was listening to the story of David. And I was struck with the fact that he is an example of someone who is leading while following. That much of the story is about his transition, where he is anointed, but he's not yet king, and dealing with all that transitionary process. And the king who he's subordinate to is a terrible, ungodly king. And I just thought maybe there were some things that could help us. So I'm just going to walk through some things related to this king, and then we'll look at one more king. First thing I observed as I was listening through the story of David is that every leader needs a GKG. I'm not talking about an EKG. an echocardiogram. I'm talking about a God cardiogram. Because one of the things that immediately jumped out to me in his story as I tried to think back over what I had listened through is in 1 Samuel 16, remember Samuel is going through the sons of Jesse. He sees Eliab, man, this has to be God's anointed. That's literally the language he used because the king was referred to as God's anointed. Jesus is called the Christ, the anointed one, God's anointed. That was just Jewish code language for their king. Surely this is the king. But ultimately we have that powerful message. They have to go and sin to get the eighth son who's out taking care of the sheep. And when he comes in, basically Samuel says, remember, man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. So it doesn't matter if I'm leading or following. I will never be successful at either one if my heart is not right. So as we think about leading while following, leading others while following others, I need to wrestle with my heart. Why do I do what I do? What motivates me? What is my focus? What am I all about? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for God? Am I doing this for others? Heart matters. And if my heart's not right, if it's impure, if it's selfish, if it's self-absorbed, then I will practice leading and following in ways that hurt both people and the kingdom of God. So I need to really wrestle with as a leader, why do I do this? Do I do this to be in front, or do I do this to glorify God? Do I do this so people will notice me, or do I do this because it gives me an opportunity to help people? I want to challenge each leader to do a GKG. Just think about what are my motivations for what I do. The second thing I'd like us to think about is that works of art take time. If you want a caricature of yourself, then you can go to Disney, pay $50, and in 15 minutes, they'll give you a little sketch, an 11 by 17 board of a funny way to look at yourself. But if you want a Sistine Chapel, it's going to take more than 15 minutes and $50. I want you to think about the fact that when David was anointed, he was around 20, we think. When he fought Goliath, he was around the age of 20. A lot of times when you see the pictures of David, they're picturing him as like a 15-year-old boy. He was already a warrior man, okay? He was built like Isaac, all right? So that's what he was back then. But I want you to think about, at the age of 20, he's anointed as king. He didn't become king till he was 30. He was anointed by God through Samuel around 20. But the people didn't anoint him till he was about 30. So I want you to think about that. There was around an 8-year or 10-year period between the time God anointed him. Let me ask you, why do you think God did that? Why do you think he went ahead and anointed this 20-year-old guy? Mm-hmm. My suspicion is he's sending a message to Saul and a message to David. He wanted David to know he had a plan for him, that he had a purpose for him, he had a mission for him. Why didn't God go ahead and give him the throne? Because he wasn't ready for it yet. God had a plan for him, and apparently David was willing to do it because he allowed himself to be anointed. He didn't fight it. He didn't do like Saul had done. He didn't go hide in the baggage. But he wasn't ready to lead yet. It's possible to be willing and not ready. It's possible to be ready and not willing. I want you to think about Moses, for example. If you look at Stephen's death sermon in Acts chapter 7, he talks about the fact that Moses thought the people would understand that he was God's means of deliverance. In other words, when he was in Egypt at the age of 40 and he killed that taskmaster, he was willing to lead. He was willing to lead the children of Israel, and he couldn't understand why they didn't see that he was their leader. 40 years later, when he's standing by a burning bush, he's ready. But he's no longer willing. He wasn't ready at age 40 to be the leader God needed him to be. Later, he had been so broken that he was right where God needed him to be. He wasn't broken enough at age 40. But at age 80, he had been humbled, and he had to get to the point he was ready to be willing again. Both of those have to come together, and a work of art takes time. And so there needed to be time for David to learn and grow, to go to school. He had to go to the school of life. And sometimes I think of all of us, you think about when you finish your undergrad degree, you've learned some information, but we're not ready to lead. Often we need life to educate us, to wake us up, to humble us, to help us to realize that life and leadership is not about a bunch of information in a book. It's about people and relationships and knowing God and loving Him and loving people. And those lessons don't come out of a book. They come out of living life. And so God basically sent him through 10 years of undergraduate and graduate life training to get him ready to be a leader. So, okay, I'm going to be 60 this year, so I get to speak as the old timer in the room, all right? So you can just, I can remember, when I was younger and some old guy says, oh, here's how it's going to be when you get old, and I just, turned him off, so you can feel free to do that. But I can tell you one of the things I see that concern me is I see a tendency for folks to want things now that their parents and grandparents worked 30 and 40 years for. Okay, I want to be the one that the elders go to for the answers right now. I want to make what the preacher makes right now. I want to be the preacher right now. I want to be the one speaking at CYC right now. I want to be the one on the gospel meeting circuit right now. And the reality is God has great plans for us. It may not be a king, but God has great plans for us. But He'll put us in that throne when He's ready. And if we rush the process, think about how many problems exist in our world because Abraham was given a promise, but he rushed the process. He took matters into his own hand, and we have fighting around the world, and millions of people have died since that time because Abraham wouldn't wait for God's process to play out like he wanted. Works of art take time. So be patient, listen, learn, and grow. The third thing I would say I learned as I look at David is that availability trumps ability. Availability trumps ability. Now, ability matters. God was training David during those 10 years. Train, learn, grow, listen, find a mentor, ask questions. But realize that changing lives and being a leader for God, it's about more than what I have the ability to do. It's about what I'm willing to do and whether I'm willing to pitch in and help. Long before he ever ascended to that throne, if they needed him to take care of sheep, he took care of sheep. And he did his best wherever he was at that stage of development. He didn't just watch the sheep. He fought off wild creatures. If he's a shepherd, there'll be no sheep dying on my watch. When they needed somebody to play a harp, he played a harp. When the king needed a general to lead his army, he was a general. When the king no longer needed him, he led a band of outcasts who were unwanted in the empire, a bunch of roving men who had been kicked out by the leadership. He took over leading his mighty men. It didn't matter what happened to him. He bloomed where he was planted. He led where he was. When he was asked to, he stepped up when called up, and often stepped up when not called because he saw the need. People respect people who are working, who are solving problems, and who are helping people. So while we're waiting for God to put us in the positions that we think we might want to do or we think He might be leading us toward, just be available and pitch in and help now. Don't be too good to do any job. You want the congregation to respect you? Hard work. People respect that. Be available. Pitch in. Help. Don't be too good for anything. Be the first one to show up for church activities. Be the last one to leave. Be the first one to pick up a broom. Be the first one to go get paper towels when a kid throws up on the floor during a church fellowship. Just keep showing up. Availability will trump ability every time. The one who's willing to help and doesn't care if they get the attention, but is willing to do whatever is needed in the moment, whether it's playing a harp, fighting a lion, or taking on a giant, in time, if you just keep doing that with a pure heart, people will notice. And in time, we'll get our throne. But availability is more important than ability. Show respect if we want respect. David respected the position of king, even though the man in the position was unworthy of the position. Now, I just want to say something as an aside. One of the things I thought about as I listened back through this, Saul had no idea how to be king because he had never seen one before. I want you to think about that. Because a lot of times we diss on him. I think the two things that hurt Saul was he had an inferiority complex. And inferiority can lead you to timidity. It can lead you to preparation, so you're not so self-conscious and you feel more confident in your job. It also can lead to arrogance. He started at one extreme and ended up at the other extreme. But his other problem was he was the first king. There was no example for him. He had never seen a king of God's people. He had never seen a godly king before. He had no example, no mentor, no pattern to follow. And so I try to think about, hey, he did a lot of really bad things, but he also he wasn't set up for success. Show respect if you want respect. In 1 Samuel 24, behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to me to kill you. But my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. 9 times in the text, David makes statements similar to that about Saul, about why he wouldn't take his life and why he wouldn't let his mighty men take David's life or take Saul's life. And then when Saul died, now remember, Saul is the guy that tried to kill him. Yet when he died, he said, O mountains of Gilboa, let not dew or rain be on you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. Would you be willing to do the eulogy of the person who tried to kill you and call him a mighty warrior who was unworthy of the death that he received? I think the reason he acted that way is that if you don't want to be assassinated as king, don't assassinate the one in front of you. So I want you to think about that. If you get to be preacher by bad-mouthing the preacher, guess what? You will leave because you got bad-mouthed by the next guy. One of the things I've always tried not to do when I went to a new congregation, even if problems at the last church led to me looking to this church, my interview with the eldership is not going to be about the last church. I'm not going to badmouth the last eldership in front of this eldership. Because the first thing going through their mind is going to be, if you'll badmouth them to us, you'll badmouth us to the next one. If we want respect, treat people with respect. If David was able to respect Saul because of his position, in spite of his imperfections, then I can respect people who have positions over me, even if they're not always perfect leaders. And most of the time in ministry, we're not dealing with a leader over us who's like Saul, who's not listening to God. It may be a leader who's not a great leader, but they still love God. They want to do right. They're just not great at that position. Most of the time, it's differences of opinion, not difference of doctrine, not a difference in how much we love God and want to do what is right. I think David teaches us when we're following others, if we want people to follow us and respect us, we need to show respect. So just live with the habit, respect your elders. I have found if you will respect age and experience, it will always bless you. Never look down on age and experience. It doesn't matter if it's the elders or if it's the custodian who has been managing the grounds of that congregation for the last 50 years. I've often said in most congregations, you could replace the preacher easier than you can replace the church secretary and the groundskeeper. Okay? Everybody knows those two. They know everybody. They know where the bodies are buried. The preachers come and go. Those people stay. Respect the secretary. Respect everybody in that congregation. It doesn't matter how old or how young they are. It doesn't matter whether they're an elder or not. It doesn't matter how much money they have, what color their skin is. If we live life respecting others, we will be respected. We don't do it for respect, but the reality is we will receive it. The last thing I want to look at with David is all leaders are second chair. I remember this quote that came from the book Manasseh had. It's important to understand that ultimately in Christ's kingdom, no matter your position of service in your organization, church, community, or government, we are all in the second chair because we all submit to Christ as head of the church. I want us to remember that the only opinion that matters is God's. At the end of the day, we all serve before an audience of one. And what gets most of us in ministry in trouble is pride and a desire for position and attention. And one of the things that just can help us to chill out is to remember that there's only one person whose opinion matters, and he already knows what we did or didn't do. So we don't have to get his attention. And if we'll just be content with honoring him, then we'll have a great ministry as a leader and as a follower. I find it interesting in 1 Samuel chapter 30, it's kind of when David hits his low point. He's been on the run from Saul. Saul's out to get him. Now, he and his mighty men, all of their wives and kids have been kidnapped, and they are literally, his mighty men who went on the run with him are about to stone him. You can look in 1 Samuel chapter 30 and in verse 6. But it says, "But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God." He then asked Abiathar to bring the ephod so he could ask questions of God. And you'll find at least 7 times in the text, it says, David inquired of the Lord. The key to leading and following is just remembering that we serve before an audience of one, that it's his opinion that matters the most. It doesn't matter if the elders get how valuable your work is. It doesn't matter if the congregation or the youth group, even your own spouse gets it. All it matters is that God is proud of what we do and that the decisions we make are about what God wants. So David consistently, when everybody else, even his mighty men, had turned against him, he said, he just turned to God. And over, when he wanted to know what to do, he prayed to God about it. Now, I'd like for a moment to turn from a king to the king. In the Lead Like the Lord book, I just spent some time going through the Gospels, looking at Jesus as a leader, and that grew out of some of my graduate work. And it was powerful to read the Bible just looking at it as a book on leadership. I truly believe that the Bible is the best book ever written on leadership. It has principles of how to do it well, how to do it poorly, and all kinds of examples of both. So I want to just highlight some things that specifically can relate to leading while following. How do I lead from the second chair? The first thing is that Jesus was centered.
Yep.
If I have a clear sense of who I am and what my mission is for God's glory, it makes all the difference in ministry. I'm not led by the opinions of others. I'm not led by a position. I want to emphasize that a position is never our mission. Everybody with me on that? A position should never be our mission. One of my favorite quotes came from Christopher Wright, who said, "It's not so much that God has a mission for His church as it is that He has a church for His mission." God is doing something in the world. He's unifying the world in Jesus Christ, is what Paul says in the Ephesian letter. He sent His Son to save the world, and in His Son wants to bring all the world together, wants to bring every human being through Christ into a relationship with Him. He's trying to reach the world and save the world. So what is my goal? What is my life about? It's not about a position. It's about figuring out, how can I, at this moment in time, do the best to help His mission become a reality? Don't ever let a position become the mission. I've got to become a preacher. I've got to become a youth minister. I've got to become an elder. I've got to preach at this church. And I've known folks that just hopped and hopped and hopped because they were hopping from stone to stone just so they could get across the creek and get to the church they wanted to be at. And I can't help but think, as they're hopping around, how many people had their faith left in their wake? So they touched them for a moment and then they were gone, and they were left spiraling in life because the mission was a position. The mission wasn't influencing people for the glory of God and to bring them into a relationship with Him. We need to wrestle with, why do we do what we do? If what we do is so we can help God fulfill His mission with whatever talents, abilities, opportunities He's given us, then a lot of the things that get us upset don't bother us anymore, because it's all about Him. All that matters is they know about that cross on that hill. So we need to declare and be centered. Jesus was able to make decisions. Everybody around Jesus had a plan for Him. Even the devil, he begins his ministry. Oh, if you're the King of the Jews, do this, do this. Over and over. Even Peter rebuked him when he started talking about dying. Why? Because Peter had a plan for him. And what happened is, most of the people quit following Jesus because they had a different plan for Jesus than God did. And so I need to be centered. Jesus was able to navigate all of that because He had a clear sense of why He was here. And you see those statements over and over. He was connected. The key factor in leadership is a heart connected to God. And I will only be as effective as I am connected to God. How close am I to God? His life, over and over, he says, I came to do the will of my Father. He was here on Father business. Isn't that how you said it? And over, at the most important moments in his life, he was praying. I want to challenge you to work on your relationship with God and work on your prayer lives. Jesus prayed at all the key moments of His life. When He chose the 12, He prayed all night long. When they asked Him to teach them how to pray in Luke 11, it's because they had just watched Him pray. Okay, He prayed. He was praying on the Mount of Transfiguration. At His baptism, when the Spirit descended on Him in the form of a dove, guess what He's doing? He's praying. He prayed in the garden. He prayed on the cross. He was praying at all the key moments of His life. And I can remember times, I don't look like it now, but I remember when I was trying to make decisions about where God may want me, we'd go through times of fasting. And I can remember saying, Cindy, I'm not eating lunch today. Why don't you eat early and I'll pick you up and let's just ride around and pray. Because this is a big decision we've got to make. And I want to have a sense of what God wants me to do. He was centered, He was connected, and He was compassionate. Leadership, here is how Henry and Richard Blackaby said it. Leadership is fundamentally about people. It's not merely about budgets or visions or strategies. It's about people. As I think about what God has done at Heritage in the time that I've gotten to be there, the keys to success have not been about policies and procedures and budgets. It's because of amazing people who have given themselves up to a great God. It's all about people. And to some degree, I wish I had learned that lesson early. I want you to think about John 1, the Word became what? Flesh. He lived in our bodies. He tabernacled in the tent of a human body. He went into people's homes. He climbed into their boats. He touched their hurts. Over and over in Matthew and Mark, you have all of these miracle stories that involve touch. It's fascinating to me because Jesus didn't need to touch anybody to heal anybody. Just look at Luke chapter 7. I like to say Jesus could throw a miracle. He didn't have to be there, okay? He didn't even have to see the person. Yet over and over when he performed miracles, he would touch people. When he healed a leper, he would touch the leper. Why is he doing that? Because the miracle is healing the outside, the touch is healing the inside. When you're a leper, you're ostracized from everybody. Nobody who's not a leper shakes hands with a leper. So Jesus healed his inside, then healed his outside. He didn't touch him after his leprosy was healed. He touched him before his leprosy was gone. Jesus invested in people. And if we invest in people, if we care about people, then we don't care where we are in the organization we're in. Because wherever we are, okay, in that org chart, there's people there. People who are hurting and who are lost and who are scared and who need God. So I don't have to worry about being somewhere else to change lives. I can change lives right where I'm at if my life is about God's mission and helping and investing in the lives of all the people around me. The final thing that I'm going to highlight as we think about just a few of these in Jesus is that he was common. And what I mean by that is Jesus was humble. We're talking about God the Son. Have you ever noticed in John 13 when Jesus washes the disciples' feet that the text begins that chapter by saying basically he knew who he was and where he was going? That's a really important statement by John because the point of his book is he's the Son of God. These are written that you might believe that he's the Son of God. So he wants his readers to understand that he's not washing feet because he thinks he's less. He does that knowing he's the Son of God. Jesus, if he left heaven, the eternal Logos became a human being, was given the human name Jesus, as we say it in our language, or Jesus, or Yeshua. That's what they called him when he was a physical human being. He emptied himself. That means when he was 30 seconds old, he knew what every other 30-second-old baby knew. Luke said he increased in what? Wisdom, stature, favor with God and man. In his eternal Logos state, you would never say he needed to increase in wisdom. But as a human being, you would. So he has to go through some process to remember who he is. I think that's why Luke tells the story when he tells about at age 12 in Luke chapter 2, where he says, I'm here on Father business. It's like he gets it. And that's why John says in John 13, he knew who he was and where he was going. He was comfortable with who he was. And as the eternal Creator, he willfully made the decision to lay that aside, grab a towel, and wash feet. If Jesus can learn to be humble, I want you to think about how hard it would have been for him to allow them to do all they did to him on the cross. To allow the religious leaders to say all the things they said to him. The high priest to say all the things that they said to him. The soldiers who slapped him. They spat on him and mocked him hanging on a cross. I'm going to tell you, I've seen enough Marvel and DC movies. What I would have pictured is just this glow coming around his body and the nails coming out of the wood while he stayed floating in the air. They spun around and went, okay, 4 soldiers guarding are gone, just like that. I mean, I want you to think about what you would like to do. You know, he just breathes. All the priests and religious leaders fall over dead. That's what I would have done. He could have called 10,000 angels. But if you look in Luke's account, he didn't call any, and God sent one. Even that one could have wiped out the entire Roman army like the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He had all authority and power, yet he laid it aside for us. If we can become leaders who don't care about position and power, who may be aware, yes, I have power and influence, but I'm not going to use it for me. The most powerful thing, I remember working as a faculty member, and one of the things I realized is the people with power were the people in the administration. And so I didn't apply for the job that I have now. I got a phone call. They said, would you talk to us? I'd made a promise to a friend, so I talked to them. But what excited me about this job, I never wanted to be a president. I just wanted to do whatever God needed me to do. And what I've liked about this job is I get to unleash other people's voices. I get to give other people power that I couldn't give power where I was before. Jesus lived that way. He had power, but he regularly is diffusing it to others. I want to remind us that Christians are called to be spotlights, not neon signs. You see, a spotlight shines on someone or something else. A neon sign says, look at me. God has called us as leaders to be spotlights pointing to other people and to Jesus, not neon signs. So as I go back to that question, what 4 things would you have, or 3 things would you have in your office? In my office, I have an old school slate that's over 100 years old that belonged to an elderly lady I used to live nearby, and on it is a sign that says, never stop learning. Because David spent 10 years getting ready to be president. I have a couple of things that go together. I have a chimney stone, and that chimney stone is from my great-grandparents, Joe and Nora Brothers. It's from their old home place in Rutherford County. And there's an old red barn, the remains of an old smokehouse, and a pile of chimney stones. There's a 40-pound chimney stone in my office that came from their chimney in that old house. I also have, if you were to walk in my office and look behind my desk to the left, for those of you that have roots at Freed Hardeman, there's an old black chair that is about 100 years old that used to be one of the stage chairs for chapel in Old Main. There's no doubt at some point Freed and Hardeman and countless other preachers sat down in that chair before they got up to speak in chapel. So let me tell you why one's to my right and one's in front of me, because they remind me that we can only see what we see because we get to stand on the shoulders of the giants who went before us. That we are what we are because of the people who paved the way. The third thing is, there is in my office a framed piece of paper. It's just an old lined paper from high school that says, I want to be a garbage man. It's not only framed in my office, it is actually the background on my computer. It was put on my back when I was in high school, back in the days when one of the pranks was you'd pat your buddy on the back and say, did you have a good weekend? You didn't care if you had a good weekend. You were putting a sign on his back that says your mother wore combat boots, or I need a date for the prom, whatever, and some were much worse. That's one I had to wear. I want to be a garbage man. And what they were saying is, a garbage man's not successful. A garbage man's not important. They meant it to be demeaning. Well, that was put on my back when I was a senior in high school, and I still have it. It will be one of the last possessions. If my office is on fire, my Bible and that sign will go out with it, with me. I keep that to remind me to never look down on people and never look down on an honest day's work, and to remind me that my Savior was a garbage man. A garbage person, a sanitation worker, takes what no one else wants. Jesus took the people that the world didn't want. And that's what leaders do. So what is going to be in your office? What's going to guide our lives as we try to be both leaders and followers? Thanks for your time.